All right, class, so welcome to Monday, May 2nd. I'm just showing our schedule because we're kind of getting down to the wire here. We don't have too much more left of class. So if you can see here today, we're going to end up finishing chapter 17, which is on nutrition and metabolism. This week in lab, we'll be doing digestive system. So you guys will have lab activities and little lectures in lab this week. And then on Wednesday of this week, you have your 5th lecture exam, just based on the chapters 14 to 17, which are your lymphatic and immunity, respiratory, and digestive system. So you have a lecture exam on Wednesday. So come to class on Wednesday with your videos turned on. And that's all we'll be doing for lecture on Wednesday. And then we just really have 2 weeks of school left after this week, where we'll be going over the urinary, reproductive, and development systems. So your final lecture exam will be Wednesday, May 18th, and then your final lab practical will be based on just exercises 15 to 17. Your lecture exam final will also just be based on these chapters, so it's not cumulative. I will double check that, but this is my 4th time teaching this course. And your final lecture exam will not be cumulative, but on Wednesday, just come ready for your next lecture exam on chapters 14 to 17. And like usual, if you guys have any questions, just feel free to email me and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. All right, so with that, we'll jump right into kind of where we left off last week, talking about vitamins. And vitamins are one of our organic molecules in very small quantities in food that are needed for metabolism. So our body needs them, and a very balanced diet, what we ingest, gives our bodies the variety of vitamins that we do need. If we have an absence of vitamins, that can lead to what we call a deficiency disease. They can be fat or water soluble, meaning they can kind of dissolve in fat and get through into cells, or they have to stay on the exterior side of cells. Fat-soluble vitamins include A, D, E, and K, and water-soluble vitamins include the B complex and C. Essential vitamins, just like essential minerals and proteins, cannot be produced by the body, and they must be obtained through the diet. And a provitamin is a part of a vitamin that the body can assemble or modify into a functional vitamin, such as the conversion to the active form of vitamin D. Most vitamins function as what we call coenzymes, which means that they'll combine with an enzyme to make the enzyme functional or able to work. And the recommended dietary allowances are all the nutrient intakes that are sufficient to meet the needs of nearly all people in a certain age and gender group. And that's because depending on your age, kid versus adult versus the elderly might need a little bit different kind of proportion of these nutrients and vitamins, as well as gender. Females in general, not that every female is going to give birth to a child, but they might need different vitamins just because of their makeup. RDAs were established for different aged males and females, starting with infants and continuing to adults. And they're also different for pregnant and lactating women. So let's go through what some of these vitamins are, what you can get them from, and then what they're good for or what a deficiency might cause. So vitamin A is also known as retinol. It's from the provitamin carotene, which is found in yellow and green vegetables like carrots. It's preformed in liver, egg yolk, butter, and milk. It's necessary for rhodopsin synthesis, which are the photoreceptors in the eyes, for normal health of epithelial cells, and for bone and tooth growth. And if you have a deficiency, it can cause rhodopsin deficiency, which can affect eyesight, night blindness, because the rhodopsin helps with your rods that help with you to be able to see in dark light. Retarded or decreased growth, skin disorders, and increased infection risk. Vitamin B1, also known as thiamine, is found in yeast, grains, and milk. It's involved in carbohydrate and amino acid metabolism, so turning your carbs and amino acids from proteins into energy. So vitamin B1 is very necessary for growth, and its deficiency can cause a disorder called beriberi, which is muscle weakness. including muscle weakness of the heart or neuritis, which is an inflammation of the neurons or nervous system, which could lead to paralysis. Vitamin B2 is riboflavin found in green vegetables, liver, wheat germ, milk, and eggs. It's a component of flavin adenodinucleotide, which is FADN. This is a compound really important in what we call the citric acid cycle, which is a part of cellular metabolism. So this vitamin B2 is important for the citric acid cycle, which is this idea of forming the glucose that you eat into energy. So very important for the body to be able to form energy, to have vitamin B2. And a deficiency can cause an eye disorder, skin cracking, especially at the corners of your mouth. Vitamin B3 niacin is found in fish, liver, red meat, yeast, grains, peas, beans, and nuts. A deficiency can cause pellagra, which can be kind of an all-inclusive disorder of diarrhea, dermatitis, and nervous system disorder. Pantothenic acid is found in liver, yeast, green vegetables, grains, and intestinal bacteria. By now you probably see kind of a general, I don't know, a lot of things have a lot of good vitamins for you, like green leafy vegetables, grains. What pantothenic acid is it's a constituent, so it's a part of the coenzyme A group, which helps with glucoproduction from lipids and amino acids and help to produce steroid hormones, which are an important part of the body and especially cellular membranes. The deficiency can cause neuromuscular dysfunction as well as fatigue. Biotin found in liver, yeast, eggs, intestinal bacteria. It's the fatty acid, part of fatty acid in nucleic acid synthesis. Nucleic acid help to form more DNA, more proteins. It helps to move pyruvic acid into the citric acid cycle, which is again a very important step in the way our bodies turn glucose into energy, called cellular metabolism. And a deficiency of biotin can cause mental and muscle dysfunction, fatigue, and nausea. So we kind of end with the deficiencies. Maybe the book tries to scare you into eating these vitamins in the above good foods, where to get it from. Vitamin B6 is found in fish, liver, yeast, tomatoes, intestinal bacteria. It's involved in amino acid metabolism. So again, breaking down amino acids so that they can be used for energy. That's whenever you see the word metabolism, it means breaking something down and using it for energy. And a deficiency can cause dermatitis, so inflammation of the skin, retarded growth, and nausea. Folate, liver, green leafy vegetables. We see a lot of green leafy vegetables. Intestinal bacteria, it's involved in nucleic acid synthesis, which again, nucleic acids are involved in your DNA, RNA. Hematopoiesis is the development of new red blood cells, and folate helps to prevent birth defects. So if you're taking prenatal vitamins, you might see folic acid included in that because that helps to prevent some birth defects, spina bifida, and other things. A deficiency can cause macrocytic anemia, which are enlarged red blood cells, and spina bifida. So that's why, again, pregnant women will take folic acid to try to decrease the possibility of spina bifida in the developing fetus. Vitamin B12 is found in liver, red meat, milk, and eggs. It's necessary for red blood cell production as well, and some nucleic acid and amino acid metabolism. A deficiency can cause a type of anemia called pernicious anemia, which is low blood cell count, and nervous system disorders. Vitamin C is the big one, found in citrus fruit. So vitamin C, citrus fruit, tomatoes, green vegetables. It's involved in collagen synthesis, as well as general protein metabolism. So again, turning protein into energy. And a deficiency can cause scurvy, which is causes defective bone formation and poor wound healing. So this is where you might have heard of people on ships, traveling or immigrating to the US, from Europe, England, Spain, Portugal, developing scurvy because they weren't eating a lot of fruits and vegetables on their voyage, which would take months. And what that could cause is defective bone formation and poor wound healing. So their wounds would stay open. So not fun, scurvy, yeah. Vitamin D is found in fish liver oil, enriched milk, and eggs. The provitamin D is converted by sunlight to cholecalciferol in the skin. And so this is why sunlight is important, because sunlight will help kind of activate this provitamin into vitamin D. And what vitamin D is important for is it's important for promoting calcium and phosphorus use. So it helps to absorb calcium and promote proper calcium and phosphorus use in the body. That's very important for normal growth and bone and tooth formation. And a deficiency can cause a disorder called rickets, which is when you have poorly developed weak bones, osteomalacia, which is a degeneration of osteotissue, and bone reabsorption. So bone kind of disintegrates. So that's vitamin D. Vitamin D, again, specifically, the sun is important to convert it into the active form of vitamin D. And then what vitamin D does is it helps your body absorb the calcium and phosphorus that it needs to develop your bones. Vitamin E is found in wheat germ, cottonseed, palm, and rice oils. Cottonseed and palm oil, I'm not super familiar with. Grain, liver, and lettuce, and it will help prevent oxidation of the cell membranes in DNA, which can be very harmful and toxic. A deficiency can cause hemolysis of red blood cells, which is the splitting apart of your red blood cells. If your red blood cells split apart and lyse open, they can't carry the oxygen that your body needs to all the tissues. Vitamin K is found in alfalfa, liver, spinach, vegetable oils, cabbage. It's required for a synthesis of a number of clotting factors, so the ability for your blood to clot. In injury, you need vitamin K for that, and a deficiency can cause excessive bleeding due to retarded or decreased blood clotting. So those are a lot of vitamins and the fun things vitamins do. In general, I think we should all eat a lot of green leafy vegetables. And then minerals are a type of inorganic nutrient that are essential for normal metabolic function. So types of minerals that your body needs are calcium, chlorine, chromium, cobalt, copper, fluorine, iodine, iron, magnesium, manganese, molybdenum, phosphorus, potassium, selenium, sodium, sulfur, and zinc. So all of these different minerals that your body needs as well. And then daily values, these appear on food labels to help people eat healthy, if any of us actually check them. It's based on a 2,000 kilocalorie diet, which is 2,000 calories. We always say kilocalories because they technically are kilocalories. Fats and 10 are proteins, and it's used to calculate the percent saturated fat, cholesterol, total carbohydrate, dietary fiber, sodium, potassium, and protein. So in 2014, a new food label was developed, and maybe you guys remember this. Old food labels looked something like this on the left side. And then around 2014, food labels changed to kind of highlight, as you can see, the calories, the amount per serving, and then the serving size. And I think this was probably a good change that they made, because when you're looking at food labels, the most important things you probably want to look at are the serving size and then the calories, the amount per serving, because that's the hardest part, I think, to identify is how much of something you need to eat in order to be appropriate for the calories that it's telling you. So you can see here that that was like a big change, that it was really highlighting the serving size and then the amount of calories in that serving size. So you can look at the differences between an original and a new food label and see if it was a good change or not. Metabolism then. So I think we end a little bit with metabolism here. Well, not yet. We have a couple more slides to get through. But metabolism is the total of all of your chemical reactions that occur in the body It consists of catabolism, which is the energy releasing process in which we break down a large molecule into a smaller one. And anabolism is the energy requiring process by which a small molecule is joined to form a larger one. So, throughout your body is constantly going through these chemical reactions that are either breaking things down or building things up again. So catabolism is breaking things apart. Anabolism is making a structure larger again. So again, an anabolism is a synthesis reaction. It requires energy. So for example, if we add a phosphate group to ADP, we get ATP that requires energy. Catabolism is a decomposition reaction. It releases energy. An example is taking that ATP that's formed and turning it into a phosphate group in ADP. So that's anabolism, synthesizing, and catabolism, desynthesizing or decomposition. ATP derived from catabolic reactions drives anabolic reactions. So this is adenosine triphosphate. It's kind of the main energy molecule that our bodies need for anything. And why is ATP our body's main energy source? And that's because between these bonds, so I'm just going to highlight bonds between phosphate groups. Those three phosphate groups, when those bonds are broken and a phosphate group kind of gets broken apart, energy is released. And energy that's released when we break those bonds can be used to drive other reactions in the body. So anabolism is the energy requiring process by which a smaller molecule joins to form a larger one. And these anabolic reactions result in the synthesis of molecules necessary for life. So the energy that is released when these bonds are broken between phosphate groups is really important for doing anabolism, kind of growing your body cells. So that's what ATP breakdown does. And then to form ATP again, catabolism is an energy releasing process by which larger molecules are broken down to smaller ones, and then energy will be released to form the ATP again. So that's why ATP is very important. And we'll talk even more about it here. The ATP is called adenosine triphosphate. It's an energy carrier, and energy is released when the ATP is broken down. So when we take apart a phosphate group. Some ATP is produced in the cytoplasm of a cell. Most of the ATP is produced in your mitochondria of the cells. Carbohydrate metabolism. So we have monosaccharides, which are, for example, glucose, simple sugars. They're the breakdown product of carbohydrate digestion, with the most important monosaccharide being glucose. If we have an excess of glucose in the blood following a meal, it can be used to form glycogen, which means that excess glucose gets taken to your liver for storage, or glucose can be partially broken down and used as a component to form lipids, which are important in the body. The metabolism of carbohydrates involves anaerobic and aerobic respiration, which is the idea of making ATP without oxygen anaerobically and with oxygen aerobically. With glycolysis being anaerobic, which is the first kind of step in producing ATP, and the citric acid cycle is aerobic, which is kind of the second step using oxygen. So glycolysis itself is a series of chemical reactions that occurs in your cytoplasm. So try to remember and connect glycolysis with cytoplasm. It results in breaking down glucose into two pyruvic acid molecules. And when glucose is converted into those two pyruvic acids, two ATP molecules are used and four are produced. So in glycolysis, in this first step, we get what we call a net gain of just two ATP molecules are produced, because we had to start with two to kind of start the process, and we get four at the end. So 4 minus 2 is a net gain of just two ATP molecules. Anaerobic respiration, again, is the process by which we break down glucose without oxygen. It's not very efficient because oxygen always helps us to give more ATP that we want. In human cells, for example, anaerobic respiration results in the production of 2 molecules of lactate and 2 molecules of ATP. Anaerobic respiration can be divided into 2 simple phases: glycolysis, which is when glucose gets turned into 2 pyruvic acid molecules, 2 ATP, and 2 what we call NADH molecules, which are very important for a final step, which we'll talk about. And the second phase of anaerobic respiration, so again, we have no oxygen present during these 2 phases. We have pyruvic acid gets converted to what we call lactic acid and then converted to lactate. So this is anaerobic respiration, how we break down glucose into energy in the absence of oxygen. We only get 2 ATPs out of it, so not much. So here's anaerobic respiration glycolysis, where we break glucose down into 2 pyruvic acids, and then the 2 pyruvic acids get broken down into 2 lactic acids, which are converted to 2 lactate molecules. And again, this doesn't produce that much ATP, only about 2. So again, in the absence of oxygen, anaerobic respiration doesn't produce a whole lot of ATP. Aerobic respiration does. Aerobic respiration is the breakdown of glucose. And again, glucose comes from anything you eat in the presence of oxygen. That's what aerobic means, to produce carbon dioxide and water as waste products. But in aerobic respiration, in the presence of oxygen, 1 glucose molecule can give us up to 38 molecules of ATP. So it's just much more efficient when oxygen is present for our body cells to turn glucose into energy. And these are the 4 main phases of what we call aerobic respiration, or cellular metabolism, or cellular respiration. The first phase is called glycolysis, which is when glucose goes through several reactions to produce 2 pyruvic acids, 2 ATPs, and 2 NADHs. That's kind of the same first step in anaerobic respiration. So we don't get a whole lot of ATP out yet, but it's what the 2 pyruvic acid molecules go on to do that starts the next 3 phases of aerobic respiration that really gives us a lot of ATP. We form acetyl-CoA. So each pyruvic acid moves from the cytoplasm into the mitochondria of the cell, where they're converted to acetyl-CoA. And acetyl-CoA then enters your citric acid cycle, also known as your Krebs cycle. And each acetyl-CoA molecule goes around the cycle once. So the citric acid cycle happens 2 times, and we form NADH, FADH2, and ATP is formed during each cycle. These are very important molecules, NADH and FADH2. They have what we call high energy electrons within the bonds between their molecules. And we'll use the electrons in these 2 molecules for the final step of cellular respiration. And ATP is always good to form. So then the electron transport chain is our 4th and final step of aerobic respiration. So in the presence of oxygen, this is the step where we produce the most ATP. It's a series of what we call electron transport molecules attached to the inner mitochondrial membrane. And we get electrons that are transferred from these NADH and FADH2 to these electron transport carriers. So electrons are transported to these carriers, passed through, and then hydrogen ions are released into the intermitochondrial compartment. Some of these electron transport carriers are also hydrogen pumps, which use some of their energy to pump hydrogen ions from the inner to the outer mitochondrial compartment. And I'll show you a picture of what I'm referring to in a minute. And because we have an increased concentration of hydrogen ions in the outer compartment, the hydrogen ions will pass back into the inner compartment by diffusion. And this diffusion of hydrogen going from a higher concentration to a lower concentration, it couples that movement to ATP production. So the movement of our hydrogen back into kind of the inner mitochondrial space is what produces the most ATP. And where oxygen comes in is if we don't have oxygen to accept the extra hydrogen and extra electrons, the citric acid cycle and your electron transport chain cannot function. So this is why our bodies need oxygen, because oxygen acts as kind of what we call the final electron acceptor. In this series of steps, it kind of takes away all the excess hydrogen and electrons, and it forms water. It forms H2O, and that's one of the waste products of these processes. So here's aerobic respiration, which is the process of taking glucose that we get from our food that we eat and turn it into energy, or ATP, that our body needs to virtually do anything in the body. Glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell. So the cytoplasm is anywhere outside of an organ, and that's where we turn glucose into two pyruvic acids. The pyruvic acids then enter what we call the outer mitochondrial, kind of the mitochondria, and then through the inner mitochondrial membrane, it will enter into, they'll change, those two pyruvic acids will change into 2-acetyl-CoAs. Then the 2-acetyl-CoAs go through the citric acid cycle, which is step 3. And then those kind of everything that's been formed up until this point, NADHs, FADH2s, extra ATP, they'll go back to the most important step, which is the electron transport chain, which is kind of a series of electron carriers in the inner mitochondrial membrane, where most of the ATP is formed. And that's our final step of aerobic respiration. And this is the final step of aerobic respiration, showing this electron transport chain. We see the outer and inner mitochondrial membrane of the mitochondria. These different carriers are labeled with Roman numerals, and what they do is electrons are transported between them in order to get energy to pump hydrogen ions into the outer compartment. What we're doing here is we're creating a highly concentrated area of hydrogen ions in the outer compartment, and that will help to drive our ATP synthase molecule, so that when hydrogen ions diffuse back into the inner compartment of the mitochondria, ATP synthase is like a motor. It turns or changes shape, and every time a hydrogen ion passes through, it creates another ATP. So the hydrogen moving through ATP synthase is what creates all this excess ATP, about 30 to 36 in just this one step. Here we have oxygen and these excess hydrogen atoms and excess electrons forming water. So oxygen acts as our final electron acceptor. It combines with hydrogen and these electrons to form water as a waste product that our body gets rid of through urinating, through breathing, and so forth. So how do lipids undergo metabolism? So triglycerides are our body's main energy storage molecules, and between meals, your triglycerides can be broken down into fatty acids and glycerol. Metabolism of lipids occurs in the mitochondria, and it's a series of reactions where 2 carbons are removed from fatty acids to form acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA can combine to form ketones, but if you have too many ketones in the diet, it can lead to acidosis in the blood. So one reason why you do not want to eat too much fat can lead to a very acidic blood. Proteins can be broken down into amino acids, which are taken up by the liver. They'll be stored in the liver to make more proteins, or they can be converted into pyruvic acid and acetyl-CoA. Metabolism of proteins can sometimes result in ammonia, which is converted to urea in the liver as well. So these are just overall pathways of metabolism of food. So this is how our body takes in the food that we eat and just gets rid of it or turns it into energy. We have lipids, carbohydrates, and proteins. The carbohydrates will be converted to glucose that enter into this aerobic respiration to create ATP. Lipids will be converted to fatty acids or glycerol, which can then enter this aerobic respiration step, or ketones to enter aerobic respiration. Proteins, amino acids, can be used to form acetyl-CoA, which can go through aerobic respiration, or other parts that will enter the aerobic respiration steps as well. The metabolic states then, so the metabolic states of our food, our food can be in an absorptive state, which is the period right after a meal where nutrients are absorbed through the intestines and then into blood circulation or lymph circulation. And this takes about 4 hours after eating. Glucose will be taken directly to cells to go through this aerobic respiration to produce ATP, but some glucose will be converted to glycogen in the liver and some to fat. If you have too much, fats will be converted to adipose tissue, which gives this more kind of fatty tissue around the body, and amino acids will be used to create proteins. The post-absorptive state will then be later in the morning, late afternoon, or the night after you eat a meal. It's still in an absorptive state, but blood glucose levels are maintained by converting molecules to glucose. You get glucose from your liver, you get it from triglycerides, or you can get glucose from amino acids. So this means that, many hours after eating a meal, your body still needs glucose to produce energy. So it'll get the excess glucose from the liver where it's been stored, triglycerides, or amino acids. So this just shows, the different nutrients that are absorbed, whether it's an amino acid, a triglyceride, or a glucose, and then what it's used for. So how the nutrients are processed. Amino acids will be used to make proteins or be turned into alpha keto acids, ammonia, or energy. Triglycerides will be used to make glucose or fatty acids. How nutrients are used and stored in the body. Amino acids will be used to make proteins and glycogen in your muscles. Triglycerides often end up in adipose tissue or fat tissue. And then glucose will be used by most tissues as well as nervous tissue to create energy and ATP. Events of the post-absorptive state then, the stored nutrients used and how the nutrients are processed. So, absorptive state would be kind of directly after a meal. But then later on at a meal, you'll see more of how these nutrients are more stored and then how the energy is used later if your body still needs energy. The metabolic rate is the amount of energy produced and used in your body per unit of time. And the BMR, basal metabolic rate, is the energy needed to keep your resting body functional. So even at rest, your body needs glucose and energy to function. So even if you do nothing all day, you'll still be hungry because your body is at work. Obviously better to get exercise and get moving, but your body constantly needs energy to do the work that's going on inside the body. And the BMR, the basal metabolic rate, is used to determine the amount of kilocalories needed per day. Your body temperature is also regulated. Average is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, 37 Celsius, and it's maintained by balancing heat input and heat loss. And the amount of heat exchanged between the environment and body is determined by the difference in temperatures. Body temperature regulation occurs by dilating your blood vessels and constricting them within the skin. Sweat glands and skeletal muscles can also be involved, so sweating releases heat or cools the body down. Your skeletal muscles can shiver to try to increase your body heat. And homeostasis of body regulation occurs by negative feedback, where the hypothalamus is the control center in the middle of the brain to monitor body temperature. Mechanisms for body heat loss. We have radiation, which is the gain or loss of heat as an infrared energy between two objects not in physical contact, like getting heat from the sun, the hot sand, or snow. Conduction is an exchange of heat between objects that are in direct contact, like touching the bottom of your feet with the ground. Convection is the transfer of heat between the body and the air or water, like a cool breeze. And then evaporation, the conversion of water from liquid to gas, like water from the body's surface. So here we have heat exchange within the body, regulation, getting radiation from the sun and water, not in direct contact. Conduction is in direct contact, radiation from the sand, and then convection from a cool breeze. Evaporation is the dissipation of heat as you turn water into a liquid or a gas. And then here's a look, we end with this slide, temperature regulation, showing how the hypothalamus is the central control center of temperature regulation. If body temperature increases above normal, usually the effectors will be your sweat glands and your skin to try to increase evaporation and heat loss, to try to bring your body temperature back within normal range. If body temperature gets too low, usually the common effector are your skeletal muscles to help to shiver, to try to increase body heat again. And that is the end of chapter 17. And if you joined us late, I'm just going to show you what we have coming up. On Wednesday, we have a lecture exam on chapters 14 to 17. So come on Wednesday with your videos turned on, and I'll get you that link. And then this week in lab, we're going through the digestive system. So for those of you who have lab with me, you have a little bit of a break here, about 50 minutes, but we'll come back at 9 a.m. for lab. And then these last three chapters, 18, 19, and 20, kind of finish up the semester for us. You'll have your lecture final on May 18th, just based on these final three chapters. And then the lab final will be that final week of class 2 based on exercises 15 to 17. So I'll end the recording, but I will stay on if anyone has any